So I really haven't talked about this before, but these reviews and stuff came around from me trying to reduce my own workload and get information out once instead of repeating the same thing around the campfire 10 times. So as this channel has grown beyond anything I ever thought it was going to be, it's become more and more important that I start to work with the industry, and what gets done in here starts to affect people's livelihoods. So with that in mind, I asked Snowy from Dagger, the designer of all of those boats that you probably know, to come and do an interview with me, talk about the Rewind, talk about Dagger, and hopefully this is something that we do more of going into the future with other brands. And unfortunately, this came together in the spur of the moment. I got home from a very busy day at work and everything was dead. So I did what I could to record the best audio and clean up I could, but it is what it is. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here, and I hope you enjoy it. There we go. Best laid plans, right?
Yeah, that's how it goes sometimes. Just think by every device possible and get there eventually.
Let me pick your brain a bit. It's been really interesting for me paddling this new boat. The Axiom was your design as well, right? Or you were involved with it?
Yeah. It's a bit, I'm not sure the exact date of that, but yeah, definitely was one sort of we worked with a team, but yeah, definitely.
So the thing that to me defines the Axiom is it's got legs, like it always feels like it's planted and rooted in. And so the first thing that I found, it reminded me of the Phantom in a way where I just tripped over edges. Like it was like being 11 again and tripping over my own feet the first day I went out, because I was like, this is going to be an Axiom with a squirtier tail. And it took me probably 2 or 3 weeks to treat it as its own, as its own individual. And it definitely came to life for me after that. But one of the silliest but most common questions I've gotten about this boat, which I almost feel bad asking, is it seems like a lot of people have had issues outfitting this boat. And I think it comes from sort of in the same way, part of the reason that it was so well planted was because the width at the hips was both high and wide, and maybe a little bit lower and wider. But then straightening the legs out, I feel like people are putting their toes all the way to the front grab loop. And because this boat was selling out so fast, I actually wound up paddling 3 of them. So every time I re-outfitted it, I moved my feet further and further back to where I have no hip shims in it, and the foot block is back as far as I can possibly squeeze it, and that seems to be the sweet spot. So when you were testing it, were you doing anything special, or have you noticed anything yourself? Because usually it's just not a question that you get.
Yeah, that is an interesting one, because obviously the fundamentals of our outfitting in there, also the bones of the outfitting, are the same across our sort of platform. We have different heights of seat fit, but it's a similar platform with a little bit of movement, sort of inboard and outboard on larger and smaller boats. So it's kind of interesting that people are commenting on that. We try also to have a pretty standard commonality in the way our boats fit with Dagger, just sort of cockpit sizing and things like that. So there is sometimes a bit of variance in where the vibrators will contact. We try to sort of bring volume in the deck, not start to bring the knees in, or out conversely, get where that volume needs to be placed around the center of the boat. So that can start to alter ergonomics a little bit. We didn't particularly go after anything sort of entirely different. It is higher in the knees in the Axiom, so I always felt with those boats they were quite low and flat. And then also with fitting the creek outfitting in there, we want to have a little bit more room for the thighs to be able to come together and then get your foot onto the step out wall. So that slightly higher higher position. So no, not a whole sort of fundamental change in there. The pitch of the creek seat could also sort of start to roll your pelvis slightly differently as well. The way that actually sort of fits compared to the play version, slightly sort of different height in those two seats and the seat pad itself. But it's an interesting question. It's not one that I've heard of a whole lot. We tested different sort of knee volumes in those boats when we were going back and forth with the different prototypes. It was more to the external volumes than what it was doing from a fit internally.
Yeah, could you speak to that? That was going to be one of my questions as well. Was how did you decide on how much volume was going to be up there? Because there's sort of like a spectrum right now, but from the Ripper, which has almost no front volume, to the Steez, which has an enormous amount of front volume.
Yeah, it's a real balance, and obviously, we started with the rewind. We were looking at what the successes of the Axiom, what do people really like, and what did they what do we not want to change in there, and obviously modernizing it with bow Waka was one of the key things, and you noted that in one of your sort of video reviews, getting that sort of bow Waka higher. And then it's a case of like, well, how big is too big? Because with a lot of boats nowadays, if you get the bow up on the surface, with all that rocker and the volume's kind of going through, the rest of the boat's going to kind of follow. And so we wanted this to be more confident downriver than the Axiom ever was, and the bow rocker certainly is the largest part of achieving that. But then it's really sort of following through with enough volume to keep it on the surface. And we didn't want to make a true creek boat up front and then just completely playful in the stern. And so keeping some of the sort of sleekness where the rocker sort of flows down, and then you've got this sort of upsweep. Trying to think of other examples of boats that do that quite well out there. So they have a sort of sleekness in the front. They don't just look sort of bulbous creek boat, and then all this playfulness in the back, because you can't forget about the fact it's got there's relatively playful stern behind you. So if you make all the front sort of super sort of confident and sort of indestructible in a way, then chances are people might leave themselves into a situation they don't really need to be in. So yeah,
that's got to be kind of the thing that would keep me up at night if I had been put in your shoes. It's the same sort of thing like when I'm rating a river, making the decision between is it a 4+ or is it a 5? Like, making this boat, the people are going to push the boundaries hard in it. And that was when the regional reps were telling me like, yeah, this is what's coming. I just remember the first thing that came out of my mouth was, it's got to have the creek seat in it. It just has to. But it also leads to the next question I was going to ask, which was one of the things that's very subtle but very important about the Ripper or the Rewind I found was that it does have a water shedding stern. You're not just scooping. So how did you make that determination on where you're going to draw the line between playfulness and river running?
Yeah, that's probably the hardest part of designing that boat, and some people are going to like something that's a little fuller and you can get downstream and they can really sort of muscle it on an eddy line or a sort of boil line to stern squirt, and other people just want something that's got finesse and a little bit more playful there, and constantly with testing, we tested this all over the place, not just southeast, the boats are up in the Pacific Northwest and had boats in the UK as well, and so it's a global testing market. It was a case of getting a lot of different feedback from different people in different scenarios and sort of distilling all that down. And so, for me, taking that information and saying, okay, well, this paddler likes this style of boat, they weigh this much, they're paddling on this type of river, and sort of put all of that into the equation. It's not a case of like, okay, did you like it or not? Is it playful enough or not? It's really knowing what type of paddler they are, what sort of style they're looking for. Because some people are comfortable in a boat that's going to be really playful on the stern, and they're getting loaded and actually steering from the back of the boat. And that's a style, but it's not a style that everyone is used to or is wanting to get used to these days, maybe. So, knowing a lot about who was testing, and then, we've got a really good team of people that work with, although I'm the one sort of distilling all that information down, definitely, leverage our team, awesome paddlers, but just know how to communicate with them as well. And what are they really feeling? It it was a tough balance as to how playful you make it versus how much it goes. And some of that even transitioned going into final production. Like we've got sort of prototype. It's a case of like, what do we like here? We've got to make that sort of, you've got to make that switch to production now, and where's this going to end up? That's always a bit of a question mark for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I understand so much better just by accident, because I decided as my Axiom was going to the end of its life just to crush out 2 gallons, 1 gallon, and the impact that had just taking this, like what should have been a negligible amount of volume out, was profound. So every curve back there really counts. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, and it adds up really quickly, it's and it's where it is, of course. That to me, we could fill it all out from the hull side, and then it's the shape of the profile of the side walls that lead into it, and it's how much of it is above the parting line and the deck side. We did focus on the sort of shape coming up into the center of the deck, and then sort of right behind the paddle, where you're sort of initiating that stern squirt. And really, dagger boats in general haven't typically had a sort of concave sort of rear deck, sort of feeling there, so water can get sort of locked into that area, load in. Sort of once it's there, it's all hard to sort of shake off at times. So I prefer to try and get either the playfulness or the downriver capability by sort of tucking the side walls, just getting a sort of a fairly sympathetic shape, I suppose. It just seems to flow well with water, and just trying to get it pretty natural in the shape that we're delivering.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about it that way, but going all the way to the Ultrafuge, that also has that same water shedding, not water scooping, and making it work with the amount of volume, the shape, and the distribution. Yeah. That's a really interesting point. And it does give you sort of an up button to stop it.
Yeah. I mean, we did play around with slightly flatter stern decks with a little bit of sort of constant sort of crown to it, and really a lot of that came into how water was going to load on there, and then also how it acted when it was on the tail. In some cases, it was sort of easier also to spin around, a little bit more sort of dome volume versus flatness, almost sort of created that sort of lock against the surface of the water when it's engaged. So there was a lot of time sort of spent with different shapes, and we would sort of manipulate prototypes as they come out of a single mold, and sort of try and sort of judge what each one was going to do, and then get it out of the water and check it out.
Got it. So changing gears a little bit, one of the things that always drives me crazy about these boats is I feel like someone will walk up and ask me a question about, hey, what's this thing? And someone in the next circle over will yell like over the top of me, oh, it's the this, right? So in what ways, how does it shake you when someone says, oh, the Phantom is the the Rewind is the Ripper Phantom, or something like that? Like it must sting.
Yeah, I mean, there's always comparisons made, but you can keep taking those back and back historically, right? So, the people remember the Ripper or the Axiom. The Axiom was out since, 2009? So it's been out there doing this for a long time, and then, but that certainly was never the first. There's plenty of boats going way back, and so, historically, you look back at, any of some Dagger's older boats, Pyranha's older boats, and companies, go back to Perception days even, sort of, there's a lot to sort of build on, and so I think what it is, people will make those comparisons all day long on things that are quite current, but then forget to really look back historically and say, well, there's other boats doing this, and ultimately, boats are going to have a fundamental similarity in different categories, because we're not trying to, if it's got to do a certain function, it's suddenly not going to be a completely different try to sort of stay ahead with our outfitting and making our boat as safe as possible, and that's a hugely important part to us. And so, sort of finding what it is about that brand or that design or the features that makes you choose and sort of vote with your dollars.
Interesting. Very, very magnanimous of you.
Entirely answered the question that you were asking.
It's very magnanimous of you. It basically says it doesn't bother you nearly as much as it would bother me.
But it kind of get on with this. I mean, once that boat's out, usually we've moved on to the next thing. And I love to hear what people have to say and the comparisons they're making. I sometimes feel there are over generous assumptions of a boat just from an image or a picture, and those are always quite interesting because there's lots of things you can say about it, but really the judgment's like you can't just jumped in and paddle this and it may do some things fantastically, and those small subtleties can make a huge difference. And that's knowing that it doesn't bother me. Just kind of get onto the next design, and hopefully there's boats within our range that people like and they'll gravitate towards, and that's good.
Gotcha. I've heard you a few times now. I mean, this is obviously the first time that we've ever spoken, but in listening to other interviews that you've done, it sort of seems like you pay attention to the legacy of Dagger. Like you were just talking about, like the water shedding of the stern. I've heard you talk in the past about the Nomad, where it's like you weren't there for the original one, I don't think, but for the second, the Nomad, you were there. And coming from Pyranha, I guess I just didn't think of. I didn't necessarily think that it would be something that you'd be watching in terms of carrying the torch for stuff that you weren't necessarily involved in, but that the brand was known for.
Yeah, I think that history is important. If it's sort of good history, and there's things to sort of learn from that. I mean, I learned a huge amount in my first sort of 3 years in the industry working at Pyranha, and always admire sort of, what those guys do and sort of pushing the boundaries of things and sort of doing a lot of new models. At the same time, Dagger was a brand that I always looked up to as well. I was always intrigued by what they were doing to have the opportunity to work with Mark Lyle, designer back then, and actually came in right when they got the first prototype of the original Nomad out, so did sort of get my sort of hands into that a little bit, but was certainly just learning and looking and sort of listening about how they develop products and theories that I had, and definitely listening also to theories of how they design boats and what they thought worked. And I think it is important. I think there's a lot to be sort of taken from there. It doesn't stop you from sort of looking at the next step and sort of moving on and progressing things. Daggers, historically, we develop our products maybe a little bit slower than other people. Usually when we do them, they stand the test of time. That's important to us, and just kind of getting some longevity in the models and getting them out there so that they're sort of as dialed in as we feel we can make them within product development cycles, because there's never a perfect answer. It's a design. It's not like it's a scientific formula and it's like, here it is, that's the answer, that's the mathematical equation, and on we go. There's always going to be some intrinsic design details. But yeah, we definitely have a little bit of sort of longer product life cycles. But I like to sort of look at what's sort of gone in the past and what worked, and we've sort of got a pretty good quiver of old Dagger boats, and sort of jump in them every now and then, and just be like, oh, that's kind of cool. I was really intrigued when everyone started talking about the outburst, and that's sort of like, I was like, oh, it's the outburst, got to figure that one out. And so I supplied one and paddled it, and I was like, yeah, it's pretty cool. I wasn't sure quite what all the buzz was about, but there's some things to learn even from that. I think sometimes people also they get nostalgic as well, and it's worth reminding ourselves, like, no, that actually wasn't what we thought, or actually it wasn't cool. So yeah,
I had that exact conversation with Corin when he dived into the disco. It went down just like that. It's like, yeah, I got back in this thing for the first time, and I don't know if I got older or what, but this is in no way what I remembered it being.
Yeah. There's things to be learned, and then there's things to take from it that are positives, and other things like, okay, we're absolutely going to improve on that. We should do after all these years, and move it forward. So.
Awesome. Speaking of moving forward, and you can absolutely say no, but the dealer packets are going out today with all the new Dagger products. Could you tell me anything about what's coming for 2021 since we don't have a PSR?
Yeah, well, I'll probably let the dealer pack speak to that. I think that's probably better. You'll see it, I'm sure, soon. Yeah, I won't. I'd love to sort of tell you firsthand on that, and it's not sort of to you directly, but yeah, we've got some cool new projects underway. So,
well, we'll touch base when it is kosher.
Yeah.
So that's not a problem. Have you, in terms of watching what's been going on in the market, what are your thoughts? Maybe this is too close to the same vein, but it's been tough going for a lot of people to bring out a full slice, and Dagger certainly has such a legacy in that segment. Is that a challenge to you, or is that something that you shy away from?
No, it's actually something that we talked about a lot, long and hard about, and actually sort of start to work up some designs for, in essence, and then really when we looked at it, the marketplace is relatively small for that type of boat. There's still a used market out there, and the used market is also going to continue to dwindle. And again, one of our takes on is the used market is a product that's probably not as safe as it could be by today's standards. And like you said, people are always going to be pushing those boats on harder and harder whitewater, and that's the kind of thing that keeps us up at night, and just knowing that that's happening. But when we sort of waited a little bit on that, and just noticing what some competitors did, and then how quickly those boats maybe entered the market and left the market, it would suggest to us that.
So unfortunately, that's where everything died, and the rest of the conversation was not recorded. That was most of what we talked about with the rewind. I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. I certainly enjoyed talking to Snowy. Thank you, man, for doing that on almost no notice. And yeah, hopefully something we do more of, follow up with other manufacturers, other designers, other people in the industry, especially with no paddle sports retailer this year. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit like and subscribe, comment if you want to see more of this stuff.